All right, and we're back for our fifth episode of the Borderline Ballers podcast. We've got Lindsey Horsting, not available this week, but she's definitely going to be back. So, guess who our assistant coach, our co-host, is this week? None other than the guy that we trust the process with, Coach Tyler. Tyler, how you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing dandy. How are you?
You know, it's a big day in sports and a big day in basketball, and I'm excited. We're gonna have a lot to talk about, I think, today, but
Uh,
a little bit away from what we normally talk about, which is the NBA. We're gonna have to maybe shift gears for the next couple weeks and take a look at this college basketball stuff.
it's tourney time. You know that time of the year. Everybody's going to be talking about it, but I think we're going to do stuff a little bit different here to make it a little better for our listeners.
And literally everyone is going to be talking about it because these are the people that you cannot stand during this time period that have not watched a basketball game, high school, college, pro, CYO game all year, and then they become rabid fans and they know everything about the brackets and they break them down. And those are just the people that, when you're at the bar, you just want to pour the beer on them and say, I'll see you later.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. Bandwagoners. Actually, I guess I would go for some soda, pouring some soda instead of course, alcoholic beverages. But
Well, in your underage situation, that's something that you might want to consider. But this is a big time for basketball, and I don't want to say that the NBA takes a back seat during this time because it doesn't. It's still very, very important. The games are on. I mean, even today, the Celtics got a nice 20-point victory over the Chicago Bulls on Selection Sunday, with the game finishing up just in time for what America seems to be most important. And even on a non-basketball kind of topic, we've got the World Baseball Classic going on now, which some people are into, which is a tournament format. So if there's ever like a tournament time all around, it's March.
and I think if you're strictly an NBA fan too, like you can totally get into this March Madness stuff because you can look ahead to the NBA draft in June. You can kind of watch some of these up and coming prospects, and apparently we're getting a loaded draft. I feel like we say that every year, but I think there are a lot of intriguing prospects to watch come tourney time this year.
Definitely, and I think we'll get into who some of those guys are. And I also think if you're an NBA fan too, there often is a little bit of a carryover from the NCAA tournament's excitement into the NBA playoffs because obviously early in April is when you have the Final Four, and then it's only a few weeks after that that the NBA playoffs start. So I've often noticed when I watch on TV, NBA fans in terms of how many people are at these games tends to go up because people just want to see basketball. So they'll be watching the college games at home, and then they'll be attending the NBA games sometimes too. So I think it benefits like both parties in a lot of ways, no question about it.
I agree totally.
But let's get into our first set of topics, and we're going to do a little bit of NBA stuff first because that's what we're pretty much all about, and then we're going to shift into some real detailed and some fun college basketball segments, which I'm really excited about. But we'll handle our normal business, which is the NBA first. And so, Coach, in the past, we've always talked about Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook together as a group. And obviously that changed in the offseason when KD headed off to Golden State to join up with maybe even one of the most super teams of all super teams. But looking at them individually this year, there's been a lot of storylines that don't even impact each other per se, in terms of like even their friendship anymore. We saw that stuff at the All-Star game. We've seen some head-to-head matchups between the two teams. But just kind of individually their seasons. And if we start off with Kevin Durant, a few weeks back, gets in a real weird injury situation where Zaza Pachulia falls back on him, ends up with an MCL sprain. Warriors looking at 4 to 6 weeks. And what do you think this does to Golden State? How does it impact them short-term, long-term? We've got a little bit of a sample set already. So what can you say about that?
And Tim, you talk about the sample set, and we've seen short term they're extremely negatively affected by this. They're 5-5 in their last 10. They've lost a couple in a row, which they haven't done since 2015. So it's really interesting to see a lot of people going into the summer, a lot of people said we don't need KD, like they don't need KD, they're totally fine. Why doesn't Golden State just run it back? But I think now in this little segment, you're able to see how big of an impact KD really had, not even offensively, but just as a defensive presence.
Yeah, he's an underrated defender, and I think sometimes, he's not as engaged as we may hope or expect him to be. But his role primarily, no matter what team he's been on, is to score. But there is an emphasis in Golden State. I think they're probably one of the better team defensive groups that you'll see. I don't think maybe Draymond a little bit as a pure one-on-one defender, and Andre Iguodala has his moments too. But they really seem to work very well collectively as a team. And when you take a piece out, like Kevin Durant, it's going to impact you on the offensive end and the defensive end. But where that translates to is engagement. And in this recent stretch for Golden State, what have you seen from an engagement standpoint and how they've played? As you mentioned, they're 5-5 in their last 10. They're on a 3-game losing streak, and they're kind of struggling right now. So what's the engagement level been for them?
And it's been really weird engagement levels. For the most part, one thing that's really stuck out the past few games without Durant is Curry and Thompson. Their shooting percentages are just way off, like abnormally off. Especially when they played your Celtics in Oracle. The Celtics just, I think Golden State ended up with 86 points or something like that. And Curry and Thompson shot a combined like under 30% from three. So that was really strange to see. And I don't know if that's more of, they were relying a little bit on KD's offense, or they're just in a shooting slump.
Well, just to respond quick on that Celtics game, that was a great win. And I know that some will say, and we're not going to talk about the Celtics as much today, some would say, well, they beat Cleveland without Kevin Love, and they beat the Celtics they beat the Warriors without Kevin Durant. But I thought it was funny, some Celtics fan must have got on Wikipedia after the game, because I saw a screenshot that said Oracle Arena was owned by the Boston Celtics, and the principal owner was Isaiah Thomas. So maybe,
wow, that's awesome. I did not see that.
Maybe, the Warriors, in all seriousness, need to kind of evaluate what it means to have this home court advantage, because it's shown the last few years. I mean, and I even take it back. I remember that one year when they were an 8 seed. This is going back before Steph and Clay and Draymond, but they had Baron Davis, and they, I think, had maybe Steven Jackson as well, and they upset as the number 8 seed over the number 1 Dallas Mavericks at the time. There's been something building there for a long time, and it's an older arena. It's kind of much more quaint, and the fans are really close to you. And guess what? The Spurs are 1 game back from the Warriors right now to get that number 1 spot. So what are we seeing here in a changing, at least at the top, in the Western Conference?
And I think that was a great transition to get into, the other teams kind of knocking on the door. But San Antonio, obviously, you just mentioned, they have their own problems. Obviously, Aldridge, we just found out he's going to be out with some heart problems. So, we're going to have to see how that is. But I think, even kind of like the lower level teams, like, a Houston or, some of these other teams, maybe even like a Utah Jazz, you can see them maybe, kind of get a little more hungry now that Golden State is kind of, out on the end losing a little bit.
Well, the seeding's different, obviously, in the NBA. When you got series and stuff like that, I think in the past few years, because March Madness and the tournament has become so mainstream to everybody, we try to translate some of that vocab and that culture onto, the NBA. And not that there's a selection show per se, but they're always talking about the seeds in the first round. And, sometimes it's irrelevant because really it's more of a matchup. But if you're the Warriors and you drop down to that 2 spot, and let's just say things hold the way they are right now, you got the Rockets as a number 3, which could be a potential second round opponent. Okay, and let's even say that the Thunder or the Grizzlies kind of figure out who's going to be that 6 or 7 spot. Okay, those are potential first round matchups. So if you're the Warriors, wouldn't it behoove you to really stay in that number 1 slot where it's more like Jazz, Clippers, Nuggets that you're going to have to deal with?
I think so. I agree on that part. Obviously, I think they would rather play an inexperienced Jazz team or someone like that, or even like Denver. Those are some of the teams that, none of their players have really been in the playoffs. But once you get to like the veteran teams like Memphis, they have a ton of guys who've been there. I mean, obviously Westbrook and stuff. My real wild card in this whole Western standings is: are we going to see the LA Clippers show up soon, or I'm getting really confused on what kind of their plan is here.
I've never trusted the Clippers. I mean, I just, I'm definitely Blake Griffin's on my all hate team, and I've never shied away from making that point. Um,
Wow.
but it just seems like the Clippers always have that injury, whether it's Chris Paul or whether it's Blake Griffin, that kind of derails them during the season. And then when they get to the playoffs, they just don't have that extra step or that extra gear. And it doesn't seem to matter who they bring in that to give them that lift. And this core group has been a talented core group for quite some period of time. And I think they were hoping, Doc Rivers, GM and head coach, was going to be, or I don't know, maybe his title is president, but was going to be able to make the necessary moves. Um, but they just remind me of those teams that at the beginning of the year you always put in the conversation and they find a way to get out of the conversation. Um,
And I think it's crazy. Like you said, they have so much talent. Chris Paul, obviously multi-time All-Star, maybe one of the best point guards of the 2000s, and he just can't get it together with any of these other supporting cast players.
I think it's tough in the NBA when it's good to have a great point guard, especially in a point guard laden league. But when your other best players are like your 4 and your 5, they've always needed more of a 2 or 3 in LA, which I think they just haven't been able to do. Is put that right 2 or 3 spot guy in there to really put him over the top, and that kind of sort of looking too with Durant out now for Golden State. They have a classic 2 and 3 situation. I mean, Curry's really a combo guard. He can play both. He likes to dominate the ball. And then you got Klay Thompson. Are these guys going to be able to play better now that the guy that they've didn't really even have in the past is out? Are we going to see better from them, which actually makes them a better matchup in the playoffs than when they have Durant?
I'm not sure really. Obviously, we've seen a little game, 10-game segment, but when you talk about Curry and Thompson, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to, kind of get it together really, unless Durant comes back for the playoffs. The shooting problems, obviously, it's just maybe like it's a shooting slump. But I mean, going into the future, I think if I'm a Houston team, if Durant's not playing, I think Houston could absolutely handle Golden State with just Curry and Thompson.
So if that's the case, then how do they work back Durant once he's healthy? And that could lead to almost the beginning of the playoffs. We haven't seen that too much, where a real stud, a real star, is out that long and then tries to hop back in the playoffs and really be a significant performer. So how are they going to work him back in, and is he receptive to being worked back in?
And Tim, it's hard to work any player who's been out for a while back into the rotation. But I mean, what they would have to do is, kind of slowly get him back into the starting lineup. But if he has a bad matchup, you just have to kind of put somebody else on him. Obviously, Klay Thompson, he's a plus defender. He can kind of handle some of the bigger players that KD would take at the 3. So in that retrospect, I think I would push KD defensively. I would have him, not take a couple plays off, but just kind of relax, get into the flow of it, so he can kind of be there more offensively for them if Thompson and Curry's shots are kind of off.
And you wonder too if Durant's going to press, because obviously the criticism has been there. You get to one finals, you're unable to beat Miami, and now everybody's talking legacy and they're talking all these things. So you wonder if he's going to press. And what I wonder too is, does this have any impact on the Eastern Conference landscape as well? Can Cleveland sit back and feel a little more comfortable now that Golden State has some things that they need to take care of, if those really are the two teams? Or is there enough in Cleveland's backyard, like the Celtics, a surging Wizards team who's now in second place in the conference. Do they have to take care of their own mess and not even worry about Golden State?
I think Cleveland's got their own mess to take care of, Tim. Obviously, we saw Andrew Bogut literally played like 80 seconds as a Cav and just broke his leg. So that is a big problem. They're bigs. Obviously, like the NBA's landscape today is small ball, but Cleveland really, besides Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love, who's out right now, they really are struggling to be, a strong rebounding team, and that's going to hurt in the playoffs. So I think obviously Boston and Washington are surging. They shouldn't really be a problem for Cleveland in the playoffs, but by all means, they should not, relax and wait.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at the standings, and really the Celtics and the Wizards are each a game. If you were just looking at wins, the Celtics are 1 game behind, and the Wizards are 2 games behind. Yeah, I think they do have to take care of their own situation and not worry so much. And maybe for the first time in a couple of years, a LeBron team is really, whether it be Miami or Cleveland, is really going to get challenged in the playoffs, and also leading up to the playoffs too, down the stretch, having to take care of business. But it is kind of interesting though how an injury on one team in a different conference can really impact the whole landscape of the league, because it just has that much significance when you only have a few teams that seem to be heading to the finals or having a chance to win the title. In years past, I think when the league was deeper all across the board, each conference would kind of hash themselves out first, and then would emerge the 2 teams that were going to play each other. And now it's kind of like, well, only 2 or 3 teams, and one injury kind of impacts everything else. But when you look at that too, there's one player, and this would be the other player of our first segment here, that is really impacting the league in a way that we haven't seen for years, and that would be Russell Westbrook. Coach, when are we going to fully appreciate what Westbrook's accomplishing this season?
And I think this is such a crazy season for Westbrook, but I think it's going to take us a little while to appreciate it. I feel like the impact of Westbrook's triple-doubles is a big deal this year, but we've seen the most triple-doubles out of any player total this year. We've seen 22 players this season who have had a triple-double. Triple-double. From, like, LeBron, obviously, Giannis, Draymond, Harden, and even some players we wouldn't even think get triple-doubles. Elfrid Payton, Nikola Jokic, Julius Randle. So I think it's hard for us to look back and say, wow, Russ had a phenomenal year. He's getting all these triple-doubles, when so many other players are doing the same thing. On a smaller scale, of course, Westbrook has 32 triple-doubles. A lot of these players only have 1. But I think on that aspect, it's going to be hard to appreciate it for a while.
It is, but I think when you start looking at him passing significant names, like Wilt Chamberlain, and, now I think he's about 9 away maybe from catching Oscar for most in a particular season. It is going to take a while, and I think, to your point, what you said was so many people getting triple-doubles these days, maybe the game is officiated differently, giving guys more time to go to the line. Of course, back in Oscar's day, you had an opportunity where you had three shots to make 2. So those guys even sometimes took more free throws and had more chances. But the formula that was kind of talked about with Westbrook early, which I thought was sort of fascinating, if he can get to the line, let's say 5 or 6 times, there's your 10 points. And then you're adding on all your field goals to that. Okay, so one quarter you decide to maybe assist a little bit more, and you're the point guard, so you're going to get those assists. And then nobody offensive rebounds anymore. So if you're in Westbrook's situation, you can just, jump in for that defensive board, knowing that nobody's going to really even be around. So he's doing all these things, and there's this question as to whether he's the MVP or not. If you take him off Oklahoma City with everything that he does, can they make the playoffs?
I don't think so. I don't think they would make the playoffs. I think Denver, Portland, they would be way better without a Westbrook in there. I don't even know who's the backup point guard is for Oklahoma City. Semjay Christian, I don't think that would work. But to go back on Westbrook, like you said, he's passing all these great names, and that's amazing. But I think when you look at MVP, I think Oklahoma City needs to win more games. I think they have to have, maybe 50 plus wins for him to be considered an MVP. I don't think an MVP has ever won and his team has had lower than 50 wins.
There's something to be said about that, and I think but when you look at it too, if you take him off OKC, all right, they don't make the playoffs, right? If you take James Harden off Houston, does Houston make the playoffs? I don't know. Are they another one of those? If the NBA had a bubble, which we'll certainly talk about the bubble later, but if the NBA had a bubble, would those be like bubble teams? So I guess I kind of look at it from my perspective. If you're on a team that if they didn't have you, they wouldn't make the playoffs, then that really makes it significant for you to be an MVP candidate, numbers aside. But if this is his real season where we really start to see him as an elite, not that we didn't before. I think people thought he was a great player, but again, playing with Durant and all that big brother shadow, garbage. Do you think that this is the makings of him becoming an all-time great?
I mean, it's an all-time great season, absolutely yes. But in terms of an all-time great, I think we need a larger sample size, and I know that's hard to say. He's been averaging close to a triple-double over the course of his 8 or 9 year career. But I feel like in the NBA, to be considered a quote-unquote all-time great, you got to win. You got to get to Western Conference Finals, which he's done, but you have to, go out and win a couple finals to be considered a great. And if he's able to do that at the end of his career, then absolutely he's an all-time great. But as of right now, after this, amazing season he's had, I still think he's got work to do. What would you say?
Well, I think he does too, but I know that, there's been a lot of all-time greats, so to speak, that have come through and played for different teams that maybe didn't necessarily get to that conference final or didn't get to that NBA finals. And I think we're very heavy on what does your resume say? And, again, there's just, and I think actually that might have even dated back to Wilt Chamberlain. The Celtics would constantly beat the Sixers every year, and then one year the Sixers finally got by them, and then they won the title. And then it was like, okay, he got his one with Philadelphia, but, maybe I should go join up in L.A. And then he didn't have the same success in L.A. that he thought he was going to have because, again, they ran into the Celtics too, and then they ran into the Knicks, and it just didn't pan out, in terms of titles. So he's almost transcendent in the way his career kind of went. But I just think we got to be careful. I don't want to anoint him yet either, but he's in his prime right now. He's 28 years old, and this is when they really say a lot of times physically you get to that high level. So, I think there will be more to come. And then, to your point, maybe a couple years down the road, 3-4 years even, now we start to have that conversation. So, it's still up in the air, but it's still impressive. Now, that being said, they made some critical moves at the deadline, but kind of like a Syracuse team that we'll talk about in our NCAA discussions, these guys are 12-20 on the road with Westbrook. I mean, is that a concern for the playoffs coming up? Can they win a series if they can't win on the road?
And honestly, I don't think that is really possible. I think you have to be a really good road team, obviously. But if Oklahoma City, if they cannot get into the upper echelon of seeding wise, even like 5, if they stay where they are 6, and they have to play Houston, I don't think they can beat Houston. I don't think they can beat the Spurs or Golden State. So the only way I think they can advance in a series is if they get that 4-5 split with either Utah, the Clippers, or Memphis.
So what's their playoff ceiling then? Of course, we learned this week from Michael Jordan that apparently the ceiling is the roof, which I thought that it was. But hey, he's the greatest, so I guess we can't dispute that.
Just gotta turn together cheek.
Yeah. So if they can't win a series or be competitive, do you think they can be a 7-game series type of team because of Westbrook's presence.
I think they could be a 7-game series, absolutely, with maybe Houston or, I don't know, maybe San Antonio. I think Westbrook, physically, I think a lot of games he sometimes just wills Oklahoma City to a win. So, I mean, I think he could, I think one game we'll see in the playoffs where Russ just, like, goes bonkers, gets, like, 15 assists, 10 rebounds, and he just, like, wills them to, like, 1 or 2 wins. So I could definitely see maybe 6 or 7 games, but I think it's going to be really tough for them to win a series without another star. Like, do you think Oklahoma City is ever going to be able to get another star with Westbrook? Whether it's free agency or a trade, I don't even know if they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know. There's again, doesn't matter what the sport is. I guess football is a little bit different in their free agency and hockey as well, but particularly basketball and baseball, it's all about getting on that big market team that's going to position you to get into the championship. And I don't know if they can really, attract a quality free agent. I know he signed a little bit of an extension at the end of last season, but I'm not really certain. But I would also, kind of close this out with a pretty bold statement, and I've thought this, and I think in the end, although we need more time, but if this is any indication, I'm going to say he's more of a complete player than Oscar Robertson. And maybe that's just the way I feel, because I hear Oscar kind of like Barkley sometimes, is that crusty old timer who doesn't want to give up the throne to anybody. But this guy does it everywhere, and that can't be debated. And you just hope, to what you're saying about bringing someone else in, that eventually he may have that quality individual that can help him get to that next level. Or maybe he goes to another team, the Celtics, and fits in that. Of course,
right. Fits in that group. I was waiting for that.
He fits in that group, but I don't know if he would fit in that group either. So, so we'll see. But anyways, let's kind of wrap up some of our NBA talk for the show with just some real quick power ranking stuff. I was able to do some of this with Lindsey a few weeks back, and I haven't seen too many things change. But what are you looking at with these injuries that have happened, and where these teams have kind of plateaued and peaked and come down and gone back up? What are your power rankings right now? At least let's start in the Western Conference where we've been.
All right, and I think it's so hard this time of year to do power rankings because really it might not even be the best team at the top of the power rankings just because of injuries and have they been hot? So I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to put the Rockets up at number 1 in the West. They've been playing really well. They've been kind of avoiding injuries. Harden's doing his thing. Gordon, Anderson, great shooters. I'm going to put them in 1. Number 2, I'm going to go with the Spurs. Now, this is kind of iffy because Aldridge is out, but the past week, I think the Spurs had a really good week. They played really well. They played some good games. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games, so they're hot. So I'm going to put them at number 2. Number 3 is going to be Golden State. Obviously, they've been kind of not doing well, 5-5 without Durant, but I feel like it would be weird not putting Golden State in the top 3. And then rounding out the West, I have the Jazz at 4, 7-3 of their last 10, and they surprisingly, I mean, I shouldn't say surprisingly because they play in Utah, but they're 22-12 at Utah. So obviously that's a tough place to play. And then rounding out the top 5, I have Oklahoma City.
I think we're going to see movement in those top 3 that you just referenced there, where because of the injuries and because of the teams kind of sort of coming back to each other a little bit right now. We're seeing that like in the past when Golden State, won as many games as they did last year. They kind of went out far, and San Antonio went out far, and then everyone else was there. But I think in those top 3, there's going to be a lot of movement as teams make up some lost ground and those sorts of things. I've got Golden State at the top until they don't deserve to be there anymore. But I kind of have almost the Rockets and the Spurs tied right beneath them. And I think San Antonio is going to be the one that would leap them, actually. But Houston, it's funny, we don't hear about them much because they don't seem to get as much TV play as the other teams do. and yet they're very worthy of, especially now if there's a Durant injury situation that's going to be further extended, that they could actually be the representative from the Western Conference. So Warriors, Rockets, Spurs are my top three. And then I like Oklahoma City as number 4. I just feel like, again, with Westbrook and everything that we talked about, they can't be counted out. And then I got the Jazz at number 5, but, you could throw a Memphis in there. You could sneak another team in there. But who's the one team that we seem to not put in that 5?
I think obviously the one team that would stick out in the West would be the Clippers. They haven't really been doing much lately. I think they're like 6-5 in their last 10 or something like that. But they have a big game. They play Utah. They play Utah on Monday in Utah. So, if the Clippers can win that game, that might move my rankings around. Here's my question, Tim. If Golden State loses to my Sixers Tuesday, will they go down your rankings? In Golden State, the game's in Golden State.
Yeah, I don't have confidence in Philly in Golden State. If the game was in Philadelphia, honestly, I would actually give Philly a little bit of an edge because I just think they tend to play well at home. The Warriors they're kind of just there to sort of like they could be moved easily. Like if they were a puzzle piece, I could just kind of move them around and see where they best fit. Because if they do lose some more games, then there is cause for concern. I don't think they're just kind of mailing it in and then saying that we'll play in the playoffs. And I think some LeBron teams have done that in the past. They've just kind of said down the stretch, hey, let's just kind of coast it in. We'll be fine once the playoffs start. And maybe Golden State can do that based on recent success, but I don't think that would be the right move. So bringing up LeBron and talking about the Eastern Conference now, where's your 5 sit in that part of the league?
For the 5 for the East, it's kind of hard because, really, there's really 4 teams who are competitive, and then 5 to 8, whatever, is just kind of in rough shape. But obviously, Cleveland's number 1. They've been kind of not playing very well. I think they're 5-5 in their last 10, like Golden State, but, it's going to take a lot to overpower the Cavs in the East. 2, I have, you might hate me for this, I have the Wizards over Boston as the 2 slot. Washington's still hot. They're 7-3 in their last 10, and they're 26-9 at home, which is like really for the East. Granted they don't really play in that good of a division, but still, they're having a great year. Kudos to them. I'm going to put them 2 for now. Boston goes to 3. I thought about putting Boston in 2. That Golden State win really has stayed with me for a while, but I think they need to prove themselves a little more. I'm still not on the Isaiah Thomas bandwagon, which you may be upset about as well. And then number 4, I have the Raptors. And I guess Atlanta's kind of knocking on the door, not really, but that would be like my top 4-ish.
Well, I think I'm going to jump right into your Wizards-Celtics thing right now. I'm going to leave the Cavs up at number 1, I suppose, out of respect. But, this is a real tight conference right now that we alluded to earlier. You got the Cavs up top, 43-21. You got the Wizards, 41-24, and the Celtics at 42-25. Identically sort of the same records with the win-loss being just a little bit different. On March 20th, the Wizards are at the Celtics. So at the beginning of next week, the week after this coming week, but this is a crucial game. And I'm really glad it's in Boston because then I feel a little bit more confident on the Celtics' chances. So what I want to do is I want to leave the Celtics at number 2, not just because, they're the most winningest franchise in the history of the NBA, and every NBA fan should be reminded of that, especially Laker fans. That game determines to me as an analyst of the game who's really in that 2 spot. If the Wizards can come in and beat the Celtics in Boston, they ultimately are that second team in my power ranking. I would acquiesce that. But I also think that if those 2 teams are going to stay 2-3, because we're not seeing the Raptors have the same surge that they had right after, no pun intended, Serge Ibaka, right after the trade deadline, That's going to be a war, a battle in the playoffs if it's Wizards Celtics, and I think we're just going to get the precursor on that at March 20th. So Celtics stay in the 2, but that game says a lot. The Raptors at 4, because we have seen how well they played after the deadline and how these little tiny moves really impacted them a lot. And then number 5, who cares? I don't care. I don't look at.
I agree. Yeah.
There's not another team in the East that anybody should even worry about. Like, the Raptors and the Hawks have pretty close records, so maybe the Raptors should be worried about the Hawks. But I wouldn't worry about anybody else. I mean, the Heat are playing a little bit better, and they're at the 9 spot, just kind of a little bit behind. The Bulls proved today, no matter how much talent they have, as far as young or old, that they're just not showing up. You'd hope you see a team like the Hornets maybe make a little run again, get themselves back in the conversation, but it doesn't matter. It really, really doesn't matter. The East is a 3.5 team race, let's put it that way. Maybe the Raptors really make a push. So now that we've analyzed both leagues, I'll run down real quick my NBA 5. I'll put Cleveland and the Warriors up on top until anybody moves them, and it could happen very soon. So they're kind of on the bubble as we get to our NCAA talks. They're a bubble top, 2 bubble top teams. And then the Spurs, the Rockets, and I like my Celtics as that 5th team. But again, as I just said, there's so much that can happen to change that. So what's your league look like, your top 5?
I kind of have like the same. It's a little moving parts. So I have Cleveland at 1. I agree. 2, I have San Antonio, and then 3, Golden State, 4, Houston, and then 5. Just like my East, I swapped the Wizards and Celtics. And I don't think anybody, Cleveland, Boston, even Toronto, did anybody see the Wizards surge coming? I know they didn't start off very well in the beginning of the season.
I don't think anybody really saw it because there has yet to really be a true time where Wall and Beal were both healthy together. I think people undervalued, Gortat, what he brings to the team. And then, of course, they had like Paul Pierce and Nene the last, not obviously last year, Pierce was on the Clippers, but they had some of those guys. So you would have thought that nucleus would have been the one with enough veteran and young presence to piece it together. But then they go out and get Bogdanovich from the Nets, and he's just like a really nice bench guy. And when they made that move at the deadline, and then they got Brandon Jennings from the Knicks, who could resurrect his career there. They've done the right things to piece together the right team. And I think that, no, we didn't see them, but they're there now. No question about it.
I think that just shows you that Scotty Brooks deserves to, coach in this league too, definitely. He's turned around 2 franchises now. I mean, granted, Washington wasn't awful, but they were nowhere near contending status as they are now before him.
No, he's always proven, from Oklahoma City on now to the Wizards, that he certainly can coach and needs that respect. So, Coach, speaking of that, being a coach and putting a team together, I wish, but there's a lot of contractual things out there, and I don't want to play that NCAA music because I haven't gotten the official okay from CBS or Turner, and I don't think they're going to give it to me. So in our minds, we'll just have to play that music for March Madness, for the NCAA tournament, and to kind of get our palates ready to really talk some bracketology. If you were a coach, which you are, and you were going to put together a team of, I'm going to say, the 8 best college guys that went on to play in the NBA. Doesn't mean they had to have a great NBA career, but they were really good in college. I want your 5 starters, your bench, and I want a coach, and give me a little bit of a rationale as to, why you would piece this team together.
Wow, this is a fully loaded question, but I've come prepared. My starting 5.
Wait, did you go to Springfield? Is that how prepared you were? Did you drive out there this week on your spring break and do some research, or did this just come to your head?
Just came to my head. Nope, could not make the trip out to Springfield, unfortunately. But I mean, these names just started popping right in my head right as I saw this question.
That's the knowledge that you bring to this show week in and week out, which is why we keep you around. So I'm glad.
What can I say? The jack of all trades.
That's right.
But my starting 5, obviously, it's going to be the legend starting off, Lou Alcindor, also known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from UCLA. It's kind of, a lot of people know his stats. Obviously, won the national championship with legendary coach John Wooden. Has all these stats. He's a legend at UCLA. Blah, blah, blah. 2, I have Christian Laettner from Duke. Obviously, I hope everybody's seen that. I Hate Christian Laettner, ESPN 30 for 30. Kind of, the player to hate in the early 90s from Duke. Won a couple national titles with Coach K. 3, I have your favorite player, Magic Johnson, Michigan State.
I like Magic. I'm not, I'm not a Magic hater.
You're not a Magic hater?
No, I mean, I don't think you can be. I think there was that, there was definitely a respect in Boston. We saw it on Larry Bird's retirement night. I mean, they gave Magic a standing ovation. So I'm not, I'm not against him.
So I have him from Michigan State, obviously, national champion, beat Bird. 4, I have Larry Bird, Indiana State, obviously the best player that will ever come out of that school.
The basketball Jesus really is what it boils down to, but I know you've got other ideas.
Of course. And then rounding out, I have my wild card starter, Tyler Hansbrough, North Carolina. And a lot of people, I think,
hated him. I hated him in college, but I was gonna put him on, knowing how great of a college player he was. So that's not a bad pick.
Only player to have all ACC 4 straight years ever in the ACC's history. He's the all-time leading scorer at UNC with obviously legendary players going there, Jordan, Worthy, etc. And he's also the all-time leading rebounder. Plus, he's got a national championship. I don't see how he can't be on this list.
And he probably had one of the most gruesome bloody noses in the history of Duke, Carolina. So, even that puts him as battle tested.
Yeah, that alone, that moment, just put him on my list. I had to look up these stats. But my bench is Grant Hill from Duke. I have 2 Duke on there, which is kind of weird, I guess. But the 90s teams who won 2 titles were unbelievable. Grant Hill's actually, I looked this up, Basketball Reference, my go-to source. First player to ever have 1,900 points, 700 rebounds, 400 assists, 200 steals, and 100 blocks ever.
That's some pretty impressive numbers, and he was not there for a full 4 years, I don't believe. I think he left after 3. He was one of the first guys to kind of exit Duke a little early.
I think that was pretty unbelievable stat. Another bench guy I have is David Thompson, NC State.
Oh, yeah.
He won the 74 title with NC State. He beat UCLA in an overtime game, dropped 30 points on, I think it was Walton's UCLA team. He might have left by then, but I'm almost certain.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did play against Walton's team, correct.
And that's the year he went on to win the title, so that was pretty important for him and NC State. And then rounding out my bench, I have Mateen Cleaves from Michigan State.
Oh, the Flintstones there from Michigan State. Him and Mo Pete.
Yeah, they were one of the best duos of the early 90s, 2000s. Won the 2000 title. Has the Michigan State record for assists in a season and all time. So I thought he should be in there, kind of making Tom Izzo's career. My coach.
Yeah, who's your coach? It should be you. It should be you, but if it can't be, who is it?
I actually had your father written down. I had Charlie Ferguson.
I'll be sure to have him listen to this episode just so he's aware of that.
I hope he is.
He does have college coaching experience at the Division III level as an assistant, so maybe that does qualify him for a coach slot.
I think he can handle these guys. He can get into Magic's face, spit flying at him. Kind of like a Bobby Knight. But my actual coach would be Jerry Tarkanian.
Oh, Tark the Shark.
Long Beach State, UNLV, Fresno State. Won the 90 title.
On a great team that he had in 1990. A team that people probably liked to hate even before they knew how to hate Duke. They wanted to hate UNLV.
Yeah. A ton of great players. He's been to 4 Final Fours, has over 750 wins. So I think he would be the perfect blend to coach this cast of players. And now I'm really interested to hear your opinions of my team, and then I'd like to hear your team as well.
Well, I like some of the mix. I think you can't leave Kareem off the mix because, of course, he was Lou Alcindor at the time. But you think back, and I've got two guys like this actually on my roster that couldn't even play as freshmen. I mean, that's back when that rule was in, and you hear these stories about, Kareem and his freshman team was beating John Wooden's essentially varsity team in games. And I think that obviously that was before redshirting went into play. But he was practicing a lot with the varsity, and so you cannot leave him off. Um, you know, I think Magic certainly is a great pick. I kind of like the out of the box. You get like a guy like Mateen Cleaves that maybe you wouldn't think about because you got to go back in the archives and think about that title run. But there are some of those guys that just kind of transcended for a year or two. I mean, he's not on your list or my list, but I know like Jay Williams, of course, then Jason Williams. Guy had a lot of weird things happen to him when he went into the NBA because he had to change his name because of another Jason Williams, and then he gets in a terrible accident. So right there, that shows you he's had to work through some things. But he's going to go in the College Basketball Hall of Fame, and you say, well, he was only there like 2 or 3 years, but that's the impact these guys made. So I love it. I love Tark. I can see him biting on that towel, sitting on the bench. So I think it's a good team. Now, I don't know if your team can beat my team, please, because we're going to have some of the same guys, so that's kind of weird. It's kind of like a video game where you put them up against each other from different eras. And that's what I thought about when we did this, because I was thinking back, and I know you love 2K and how they have all these great NBA teams on, but there was a time, and you remember the time too, when there was a March Madness video game, and there was these classic legendary teams. I even think back to Sega Genesis when I had Coach K College Basketball, and they had some of these legendary teams. So I started thinking about that. And I don't know if you can remember, I don't know if I should bring them up or not. When you were, this is a total aside here, we're going off the rails with the show briefly. When you were with the JV team, was a kid by the name of Fletcher on the varsity, or had he already graduated at your former high school?
Fletcher? I think he graduated. I don't remember that name.
Well, the reason that comes up is because I'll never forget when he was on the JVs and how he would come to practice sometimes and be telling my father and I that he just got done playing a season with North Carolina and he had used these plays in March Madness and they would work for our team.
Oh my God.
This kid had his own, checkered life. But anyways, those kind of things swirl in my mind when I think about these legendary teams. So, my starters, all right? Obviously, Kareem, we've said enough about him. I believe you brought up Christian Laettner as well, and he would kind of be at my forward spot. Certainly, we've all learned to hate Laettner, but there wasn't a better college player in many ways. And I'm actually reading a book right now about the Dream Team that talks about his adjustment to kind of being around those guys. And, immediately his fame as a player plummeted, but great college career. Larry Bird, because Larry Bird is maybe the greatest of all time. I know some people would disagree about that. But you take an Indiana State program that really wasn't even on the map, and you take them to a title game. They lose, but you take them to a title game. That there and of itself. When you see the teams from the Missouri Valley Conference like the Wichita States, and you see Gonzaga and those types of schools, that's what Larry Bird did for Indiana State when he played. I've got Pete Maravich as my guard because Pete Maravich still holds the all-time record for, I believe, points scored, and he averaged 44 a game in a season when he was in college.
And this was so hard. There was literally so many good players I wanted to put in like him, and you just had to leave him out.
It's hard. It's hard, and he was like Kareem, where he couldn't play his freshman year either. So another set of craziness. And then to round out my starters, and I didn't really know what position I'd put this guy at, a guy that was drafted that we never got to see in the NBA because of a kind of a terrible sort of drug-related potential accident was Len Bias. When he got drafted by the Celtics, I mean,
Oh, okay.
they thought he was going to be Jordan. I mean, he was that heralded of a college player, and he had played pickup games against NBA players and just dogged those guys. And
he's from Maryland, right?
Yeah, he went to Maryland, and you know, so we'll never really truly know. So he's on there with an asterisk because he got drafted, but he never played in the NBA. But Len Bias has got to be on an all-time team. My bench, Patrick Ewing. You think Big East, there's a lot of schools, a lot of great players in the Big East back in those 80s years. Chris Mullen, St. John's, you know, Pearl Washington, Syracuse. But Patrick Ewing was so dominant, and they went to, I believe it was like 2 or 3 consecutive Final Fours in his time there, which is extremely impressive. Danny Manning at Kansas.
Oh, okay.
Danny and the Miracles. And now Danny's going to have a chance as head coach of Wake Forest to coach in the NCAA tournament. So, and I know he was an assistant with Kansas previously, but, you know, Danny Manning had a great career and then kind of ended up in the pros with, he was cursed. He was on the Clippers, you know, and his career didn't really pan out to be the same. And my final bench guy is a New York State guy, but another like pistol kind of guy in a way, Jimmer Fredette, who we're seeing put up great numbers in China. Not the same, but the Jimmer. I mean, he led college in scoring and was just beating everybody.
Yeah, Jimmer has like one of the best highlight reels on YouTube of like BYU. He just literally he could pull up from half court and it would just no doubt swish.
And here's a guy who honed his skills playing pickup ball in a local jail up near Glens Falls. So anybody that, you know, works on their game at a jail against convicts and inmates and stuff, he's got to be on my team. And then my coach, an out-of-the-box coach, kind of like, you know, in the same breath you did with Tarkanian. I mean, people could have picked Coach K. They could have picked Izzo. Could have picked Wooden. I picked Don Haskins. I mean, what he did with Texas Western when he started, you know, 5 black players, which the movie Glory Road was based on, you know, to play in that championship game and to beat Kentucky, set the game on such a course that it had no idea, you know, that we would be where we are today. And in basketball, African Americans are the dominant players in so many ways. And that's taken nothing away from any other group of people. But a guy like him that kind of put that out there and planted that seed, and I'm not saying he's responsible for it, players have to play. But that's the kind of coach you want to have, a guy that's willing to take risks, a guy that's willing to, you know, accept people and bring them on for their talents, and a guy that puts all that together to try to win. And so I kind of thought Don Haskins could get a little nod for that. So
I like that pick. Trendy.
It's different. Yeah, you know, so I think we got some mirror images here, and it's a deep squad. I mean, maybe they'd probably hold each other to, like, the final score would be like 20 to 15 because there's so much offense, but yet so much defense. And, like, I don't even know who could win this game. Like, it's crazy. So we're not going to see any of these guys starting this week, Coach.
Unfortunately not. That'd be amazing.
Maybe the second biggest sports holiday after the Super Bowl, and probably even more anticipation in some regards than even this past presidential election, which I thought took the cake for anticipation of who was going to win. We are now getting the opportunity to have some borderline bracketology because we got the teams. Finally, we've been waiting all year. It's Selection Sunday. We finally got the teams, and they're here in front of us. So we don't need to fill our brackets out yet, but let's look at these brackets and let's dive in. We can give some of our picks at the end, but let's start right away with these number 1 seeds. Villanova, the number 1 of number 1s, Kansas, North Carolina, and Gonzaga. What's the toughest region overall, and which one of these number 1s do you think has the hardest road to get to Phoenix?
Looking at it extremely quickly when they released it, CBS, one of the harder segments that I think is in the tourney is obviously going to be the West, which is Gonzaga's region. I feel like they kind of always do that to Gonzaga because nobody really thinks they're ever going to make it. past like the Elite Eight.
That's true.
But I think if you look in there, West Virginia is going to be a wicked tough out. They're amazing. They play defense, incredible in the Big 12. They're definitely a trendy pick for the Final Four. You look at a couple ACC teams in there, Florida State, Notre Dame. They've been playing high competition all year long. They're going to be tough out. And that's before you even get to Arizona, who just beat Oregon and UCLA to win the Pac-12. So they're going to be really hot. But overall, I think that was the toughest segment. Do you agree? You think there's a tougher segment?
So the West is what you're going with then?
I would say West, yeah. Yep.
Well, I guess mine are in a sort of a different situation, and I'm looking at the toughest spots and maybe the toughest road coming out of the Midwest and the South. All right, so Kansas, I believe, has the hardest road, and the reason I say this is because they have a second round matchup with. You see, Michigan State got in, and you know every year Michigan State, they just seem to make a run. Now, I don't know what the run's going to be this year. It might just be one win over Miami. I wouldn't want to be Kansas taking on a gauntlet-tested Michigan State team in that second round. Plus, an Iowa State team that I believe has already given them fits, all right, and played very successfully in the Big 12 tournament. Purdue's up on top of that bracket. And then if you move further down, look who's coming out of the bottom. Michigan, Louisville, Oregon. So
Michigan's hot, too.
And Michigan is so hot, and I want to talk about them later, everything that's certainly happened to them. Very unfortunate tragedy with the airplane, and then they had to play in their practice uniforms, and then they made it through and won the Big Ten tournament. So to me, that's super hard. That Midwest is really hard for Kansas. And then I look at the South, and I say, Carolina's pretty battle-tested coming out of the ACC, but there's still some really good teams that they're going to have to deal with. If it could be Kentucky down the road, it could be UCLA coming from that bottom part of the bracket, and a lot of people are really high on Middle Tennessee. And I think anybody from Central New York remembers Middle Tennessee did Syracuse a huge favor last year when they were on the up, beating Michigan State when they were the 15 seed in the first round. So I see, not that the other ones are cakewalks, but I think for me, the Midwest and the South look like the hardest way to kind of make their way through.
So I guess by both of us saying our hardest ones, we both by not saying it, we both agreed that the East is probably going to be somewhat of a decent cakewalk for Villanova.
Again, I don't know. You've got a Duke team that just who's hot, just won the ACC tournament, and you want to kind of respect that. But what I'm kind of shocked about too is that I don't feel like every year the number one overall seed had the easiest road to the Final Four. And this year it just seems more so. I mean, you're going to get some fun games in the first round. Baylor might sneak out as Duke, maybe they would meet each other in a regional semi or something like that. But it just doesn't seem to be as difficult. And, of course, Villanova, and I guess they do kind of set this up a little bit, but they're going to go from Buffalo to MSG for their two sets of sites if they, obviously make it through. And being in Philadelphia, you're going to get so much support. Your fans are going to go to both spots. So, I've just never seen it, not that it's blatant, but it just seems blatant. And again, the West is that region to me where it's like they just kind of throw people in there. There's just all these mix of teams, and, maybe that leads to excitement. I'm not really sure. So we've talked about, these roads, but when you look at the spots like these pods, these cities, and these sites, what to you seems to be some of the coolest pods? And you can identify them by teams or locations, but what seems to be kind of the coolest spots of basketball or teams that are there?
I think there's a lot of cool spots. A couple interesting games that I really like is I think it's going to be interesting to see teams like a UCLA or like Oregon. I think they're both playing in Sacramento. Maybe Sacramento.
Yes, they are. Pretty much the Pac-12, with the exception of Arizona being in Salt Lake City, but the Pac-12 is kind of in Sacramento.
So those are going to kind of be like home games, I guess. I mean, I don't see them getting upset in either place, but I'm always interested to see and you see a bunch of these 3 seeds are playing right where like right by, like Florida State's in, I think they're in Florida, right? Orlando. Florida State's in Orlando.
Yep.
Like Florida's in Orlando. So I don't know if they do this on purpose. They give like the higher seeds, obviously, like almost right at home, or I don't know how they determine all that.
Within the last few years, and I say probably about a decade, when they started putting these pod systems together, and I know like family and friends, as I would try to explain it to them, they didn't really understand, because when it first came out, because it was like, well, what are they doing? So you mean you've got 4 teams from Buffalo feeding into the East, and then 4 other teams feeding into the West. But obviously what they're trying to do is kind of cut down on that travel and sort of reward teams a little bit that did well, keep them close to home. But I think what it really comes down to, which I'm sure you could probably agree, is money. I mean, you look at a lot of these sites, sometimes for certain games it's pretty empty. So if you can put teams that are regionally or geographically close, it's all about money.
Right, yeah. Where is the Final Four Phoenix, right?
Final Four's in Phoenix. So, and that's a site that they have not been to before, because usually it's kind of the classic, like, New Orleans Superdome or Houston or Indianapolis or,
I feel like every major sporting event, like, played at Houston. Either this year or, like, the last, like, 2 or 3 years. I feel like every time someone goes through Houston.
It's funny how that bid works, and I'm not sure who has the Final Four next year. I mean, we can look that up here as we're going through. But usually what happens is one of the regional sites becomes the Final Four for next year. But when you look at this, none of the regionals this year are in a dome. You have
San Antonio. Next year, San Antonio.
Is it? Okay, so there must have been maybe a conflict where they couldn't use San Antonio this year as a site for the regionals, because you're looking at MSG, San Jose, Kansas City, Memphis. Those are all kind of like NBA/hockey, locations. So right. I don't know why, that's the case, but I kind of agree. I like this Orlando gig, and it's funny because my family's down there this weekend, and I'm not there, so I won't be around the hoopla, so to speak. But when you're putting teams like Florida and Florida State, and then Florida Gulf Coast, and I happened to be there for that Florida Gulf Coast Georgetown game live. I remember that. I can say that. Dunk City, that just, you can imagine what the excitement's going to be in Orlando. I think Indianapolis is going to be pretty cool because you're sending Kentucky and Louisville, which are just like, across the street, and you're in Indiana. So you're going to have those teams there. And then because of that insensitive, in my opinion, law in North Carolina, they had to move out of North Carolina, the NCAA tournament, and push things into Greenville this year, South Carolina. And I was looking, Duke and South Carolina could be a second-round matchup. That could be some trouble for Duke. Their fans are going to travel, you know that. But to have South Carolina play like 2 home games, I mean, that's pretty cool. So I like some of these sites. I think, as we kind of talked about, some teams are going to travel well. The Florida teams don't have to go very far. The Carolina teams are all in Greenville, so they can just, kind of come down the border. So I think the NCAA kind of really geographically pieced things together right, with the exception of a few spots for the first time in a long time. Let's shift.
I wonder if Salt Lake City is going to be a problem for some players to adjust. Playing out in Utah, do you think that would be a problem for anyone?
Elevation-wise?
Yeah.
Maybe. But when you look at, like, Arizona's going to be there, and
like Gonzaga,
the Zags will be there. They come from relatively mountainous states, so I'm not really sure how that's going to impact teams. I think more importantly, you're going to have like the Zags there, and you're going to have Arizona there, and St. Mary's. There's going to be your hard fan bases, but then the darlings of the tournament is the team that finally got in after all these years of never playing in the NCAAs, and that's Northwestern. And they're going to go to Salt Lake. So a lot of eyes might be on Salt Lake, and a lot of excitement might be there, and that might overcome the atmospheric pressure, so to speak.
Right, yeah. It's going to be something to watch, I would say, for sure.
Now, every year, too, Coach, we're starting to see a team come out of Dayton. and they get that win in the first 4. And
that
then,
was one of my questions I was going to ask too. But yeah,
yeah, and they make a little run. So who's your Dayton team? Dayton's in the tournament, of course, too. But who's your Dayton team that you think's going to make a little run? They're going to win a game and move on.
And I think this part is tough because one of these teams is definitely going to probably win a game or two. But I think I would look at the Kansas State Wake Forest game rather than Providence USC because I think SMU is really hot, and I just think they're going to win whoever wins that game. But if I were to pick, I think one of those teams, either Kansas State or Wake Forest, I'm kind of leaning towards Kansas State. I think one of them is going to beat Cincinnati. That would be my pick.
I'm looking.
And then maybe I don't know if they could challenge UCLA, but
I'm looking at USC, and I'm not getting overly excited because I think SMU is a good squad, and like you said, they played really well. They rolled through the American Conference regular season, postseason tournament as well, and I think a lot of people kind of wondered, with Larry Brown retiring, and there being more scandals everywhere where Larry Brown is, just kind of like we find out after John Calipari, wherever he is. But I didn't know how they'd really respond. But I always worry sometimes about a team that's been so good and has kind of rolled through with marginal competition. And so I'm not saying that I disagree with you because I could very easily, before I put any of this stuff together, I could very easily pick SMU to win that game. But I think that maybe USC in a slightly battle-tested Pac-12 could give them a really good game. But I don't know if we have really strong 11 seeds this year because they said the bubble was not really strong this year. That you say, okay, one of these teams from Dayton really excites the heck out of me, and I think that they can move and win a couple games. In the past, you could circle a team from Dayton and then move them on and get kind of excited about that and say, oh, yeah, they're going to be my 12 seed that's going to win a couple games or whatever the case may be. And I just didn't see that depth this year in the, in that bubble list.
What do you think of a team like Syracuse who got left out? Do you think if you plug them into one of these playing games, like maybe take out Wake Forest, could they have had a better chance to make a run? I think Baylor. I feel like Baylor always gets upset. I remember the Georgia State game; they beat them on a game-winning 3, and the coach R.J. Hunter, he hit the game-winning shot. His dad fell out of his chair because he's on crutches, right?
Former Celtic R.J. Hunter. Yep.
Yep. I was waiting for you to get that in there, but I feel like. I don't know. I feel like Syracuse, compared to some of these other teams, had more of an upset potential roster. I guess I don't know.
I think Syracuse for sure would have that potential for upset, without a doubt. I think if you piece them in, maybe they're playing Kansas State, they would probably give SMU a really good game. Or if you put them if they were either Providence or Southern Cal, then they would give SMU a good game. If I'm looking here to find, then if Syracuse was to win in that Kansas State Wake Forest game, they would end up playing a Cincinnati, and I think they'd be really competitive. And this is going to really, if we have a lot of listeners from Syracuse, it's going to drive them nuts. But I think it's about time. I'm really tired of this Syracuse bubble thing and people complaining, they get screwed. They won some big games against top 10 opponents. And I think that should have gotten them in. But what I didn't really realize until people started, they won 2 road games all year. And that's even including probably some neutral sites too. I'm not really sure how they factor that in.
I know one was the NC State overtime game. That was one that I know of. But I mean, NC State's not obviously a top tier team.
Right. And so do they really deserve to get in? And I'm sort of getting to that point where I'm just tired of this Syracuse thing. They always talk about their recruits and who's coming in and who's not and why this is going to be the best team you've ever seen at Syracuse. And then it's the same story and it's the same struggles. And it's Syracuse, just why do you put yourselves through this every single year? And now you didn't get in. And guess what? It's on you. And I know everyone's down in Boeheim, and this and that, but I was kind of glad to see him left out of the field. Now I'm not a true fan, and I was more of a fan when I was a kid, but it's time that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, that you just don't get in. I don't know. Are there any other teams in your mind that you thought are like in the NIT field that like just like Syracuse had a real gripe or not?
I mean, there's not really any that I can think of, but I just wish I wish the committee. Obviously, now that I think of one team, Illinois State was like a big mid major team that didn't get in that everybody like got like upset about. But I don't think the committee has ever come out and said, listen, like these are the stats we value the most. Because I feel like that is such a big discussion. Like, oh, their RPI, their BPI, their top 50 wins. Like, which one of these really matter, or do all of them matter?
Yeah, the criteria is not really what you'd like it to be. I mean, it just isn't there, and I don't know. They're never probably going to ever reveal it, the way they should. But I did notice that about Illinois State, and they had beaten Wichita State during the regular year, and Wichita State's been kind of a mid-major power in recent years. So maybe they needed to do a little bit more in terms of who they scheduled, and sometimes you just may not have the right team to schedule a gauntlet, and taking that a step further, like when the committee values, like you said, what is it, RPI, what is it, BPI, what is all this stuff, you're not always in a position to put together the best resume, and then you go out and you win games, and then it like doesn't even matter. So you're looking for a criteria that you don't really even know what it is, and that.
And I think the conference tournament too is like a really big deal that the committee doesn't really say, they don't really mention it, but
The committee is consistently a mystery, but again, I think they had an easier job this year than they've had in recent years because that bubble wasn't so significant. We're kind of scratching for teams. Syracuse sort of is the obvious one that sticks out.
right.
You might be able to mention in Indiana, you might be able to mention Cal, but there's just not as many teams like, oh yeah, this team really didn't make it either. So beyond just the teams and we'll talk about where we think which team's going to head here and there, but there's going to be some big players that people are going to, if you had, for those fans that haven't paid attention all year, that are coming out of the woodwork, that are huge basketball fans allegedly. Who are some of the players that we can look forward to that are going to be drafted this year, getting back to kind of our NBA stuff?
And I love tournament time because it's almost the perfect blend of great upperclassmen players who play on some top tier teams like Villanova, Josh Hart, great upperclassmen, and then you can see a lot of like the freshman phenoms. Some of them don't even get in though. Like last year, Ben Simmons, number 1 overall pick, couldn't even make the tournament. This year, potential number 1 overall pick, Markelle Fultz for Washington, they stunk. They're not in. But there's a lot of players that I think are interesting. Obviously, you look at basically the NBA prep school, Kentucky. They have a couple freshmen, Malik Monk,
Right.
De'Aaron
Yep.
Fox. And then you look at some other teams, like maybe even like a UCLA, obviously Lonzo Ball. But, I mean, those are kind of also both in the South region. So I guess if I were to pick a region, maybe specifically where I would look for some NBA potential, I think I would pick the South because you got Kentucky, you have UCLA, you have North Carolina, who has Joel Berry, who's had a he's upperclassman, pretty good junior season. But what about you? What are some other names that you're kind of seeing maybe in some other regions?
Well, I'm getting a little tired of the ball conversation. I wish Dad would just go away and like just do something else, because it's just like this weird like Earl Woods, Tiger Woods thing, and I'm just sick of it. But I look at Frank Mason at Kansas, and I see him as just a real tough, hard-nosed player. You're seeing a lot of guys wear 0 now. I think they must be Westbrook fans, and I'm not putting him on that level with that career projection at all. But there's a guy who's been at Kansas for a few years now, kind of learning how to win, developing himself. And of course, we always get guys that sometimes you don't pay as much attention to during the season, either you don't know about, and then they make this great tournament run and their draft stock goes up. And I think he's a guy who's really good, but has been under the radar because we talk about the Kentucky players, we talk about Ball at UCLA, and who's that next tier of lottery guys that are probably gonna potentially be in the draft discussion. And but very much like this, as we said, this wasn't heavy on bubble teams. I don't think this year they want to talk about this being a deep draft. I don't know, maybe there's a lot of Euros and other guys stuck in the mix, but I feel like we haven't had as many players like stand out. Like we don't have like Kentucky's had in the past, like Anthony Davis, where you're talking about him all season long, or somebody from Duke or Carolina where it's been like, oh yeah, that's the guy, and even like Simmons last year. So does this become kind of a place where that guy emerges this year in this tournament?
I mean, you'd hope so. Usually at this time, like you have a clear person who you're like, oh yeah, they should win the Wooden Award. Like you said, like Simmons, Anthony Davis, like these these players who are like unbelievable. But this year, I mean, I don't really know. If you were to ask me who the best player in college basketball was this year, like it would take me some time. Usually, like you can just run it off, like you just instantly say who you think. But I mean, this year I think is kind of different, and I think upperclassmen have had a bigger impact than the freshmen this year, which is really different from the past 5 or 6 years.
There seems to be a lot of teams, just good like teams, not even great teams. Again, you look at this tournament and it doesn't have a team. There's a lot of teams that could probably win. In some ways, maybe 6-7 teams could win, but it's going to be more about the schools than it is ever about one player or even about one school. When they release the top 4 overall seeds, Villanova gets number 1. Are they that much better than Kansas? Carolina was a surprise to some people as a number 1, but like they're always in the discussion. So it's just been kind of one of those years where you just kind of like watch the games and then you have fun and see what happens in the games. And maybe that's what's going to happen with these players. We're going to see some great games and say, ooh, maybe this is a guy that's going to be a great draft pick. But right now, we just don't really know. So we've broken down the brackets in different ways, Coach. But let's do the classic thing that everybody does. Okay, who they're sending to the Final Four, who are the sleepers, who are the upset teams, and who's ultimately their champion. So let's work from the outside in as far as first round stuff. Give me like 4 or 5 teams, and you don't have to go in grave detail, but 4 or 5 teams that you think in that first weekend are going to win a game, maybe 2, get to the regionals.
A couple sleepers. I don't know why, but like I watched a ton of Atlantic 10 basketball this week. Like I watched almost the whole like tournament, and they took 3 teams from that. They took Dayton, they took VCU, and they took Rhode Island, who won the conference tournament. I could see Rhode Island absolutely winning a game over Creighton. I don't know if they could beat Oregon, but I think Rhode Island is a trendy team for me that I really like. If we stayed in the Atlantic 10, I think VCU could beat St. Mary's. Then again, I don't know about Arizona, but I think this year, and I don't know the statistic for how many 12 seeds beat a 5, but I don't know about you, but the only 12 seed that I see that could have a chance is Middle Tennessee, who you mentioned earlier.
Isn't it funny how that 5-12 game has really become mainstream? Like back in the day, it was like that undercover thing, like, oh yeah, I'm going to pick that 12 because they might beat the 5. And now, like I saw a Reese's commercial today, like where they told you eat 2 Reese's if you picked, the 12 over the 5. Like
right.
it's become so mainstream in picking, those first round upsets. But now I think, to what you're saying in your point, it extends out to the 13. It extends out to maybe the 14, certainly the 11.
And I think it's the same thing with the 4 and the 13 too. Like you just mentioned, I feel like there's always a 13 seed that wins. But I mean, I don't really see any strong 13 teams. And I think there's a lot of good 4 seeds: Butler, West Virginia, Florida, and Purdue. Like I don't really see any of them losing.
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting numbers. I mean, where the seating is and where people are mixed. I talked about South Carolina earlier. I really think when you're playing games in South Carolina, there's a chance they could, certainly win that first. It wouldn't be an upset over Marquette, and then maybe beat Duke in that second week, or second game, I should say. Florida Gulf Coast. I mean, you're in Florida. It's going to be the Florida Wars to win these games. It's too bad Miami, Michigan State didn't somehow end up there too, because that would have been crazy. Um, but to your A10 point, and you obviously, if you watched a lot over the last couple days, and I believe NBC Sports, and then the final was on CBS today. But what do you make of the Rhode Island Rams?
I was raving about Rhode Island earlier. One dude you have to watch. You have to watch out for E.C. Matthews. He's a lefty. He's like a combo guard. Has a little bit of like an in and out game. Can get into the paint. And then they have a lot of their bigs are upperclassmen too. And E.C. Matthews, I think, is a sophomore. But Rhode Island took down VCU, and they slaughtered somebody before that. Dayton. I don't know about Dayton this year. Dayton is usually like a trendy upset pick, but I think they might get upset. They got hammered. Oh, Davidson. Dayton lost to Davidson by like 5, and then Davidson went to play Rhode Island. Rhode Island beat them by like 20 points. So it's really going to be interesting, and it's like the Atlantic 10 is cool because it's not like a mid-major school, but nobody really kind of pays attention, and they always have an upset. Like, I feel like Richmond always has an upset win from that conference whenever they're in the tournament.
The A10 used to be the mid-major, the classic mid-major back, when I was younger even. Like, when the A10 tournament was kind of like, ooh, who are these teams? And you had, like, St. Bonaventure, and you had, like, LaSalle.
Right.
And I think now they would be that first conference that would be just below the big Power 5, as far as basketball goes. And that they're not in the Power 5, but they're close, and it's very close. So yeah, I mean, I watched Rhode Island a little bit over the last couple days, and I think Danny Hurley's done a great job, and certainly the pedigree there with his father being a great high school coach, and Danny's out at Bobby's out at Arizona State right now trying to do some things, but he did a great job with Buffalo, and they got some upsets. We've talked about Middle Tennessee a little bit already too. But I want to ask you this. I don't know if you tuned in, because I say I wasn't on the team, but, we almost pulled it off again. You Albany Great Danes went down to the Vermont Catamounts. You think Vermont's got it in them this year like they did when they beat Syracuse?
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I think they have a chance. Purdue, they looked kind of lackadaisical in their conference tournament, I guess, if I were to put a name on it. But I mean, I think totally, if Vermont wins that game, I think they could totally beat Iowa State, because I don't think Iowa State's that strong too. It's just getting to. I think Kansas is great, but I think if I were to pick maybe one of the 1 seeds to go out first, I think obviously everybody says Gonzaga, but Kansas really does not have a good history of making runs in the NCAA tournament as a high seed.
I remember years back they lose to Bucknell. I think it was like in the second round or something crazy like that, or maybe like Bucknell had made their way through a little bit further or something. I can't remember what the seeding was at the time, but yeah, they do struggle as that number 1. And just going back on Vermont real quick, they were 16-0 in the America East, and I don't think America East was as strong this year as they've been in the past. But it might have helped them that Albany game was so difficult, because they were blowing teams out. I think they beat New Hampshire in the semi by like 25 or 30 points. So they might have got just the punch in the mouth that they needed to say, hey, are we really as good as our record says? And
it's like a wake-up call, yeah.
Yeah, and that happens in these conference tournaments for the big teams, for the smaller teams, and what have you. So if those are kind of our nucleus of upset squads, who are your sleepers, teams that could make it deep to the regionals, maybe the Final Four, and they don't have to be like random school either. Like they could be a normal power school, but who do you think are like your sleeper teams?
I guess some trendy picks. Florida. I think Florida's had a really good year in the SEC, an improved SEC for that matter. I think they had a lot of strong teams this year. Florida, Kentucky. I think Alabama was much improved, but they didn't get in. Some other good teams, but I think Florida Florida definitely has a chance to get out of that East bracket. A couple other teams I like. Oregon, obviously. I think the Pac-12 was strong this year, so I don't know if Arizona's a sleeper, but I have them in my Final Four, which we'll get to later. But SMU we mentioned as well earlier. Like I said, I think Baylor always gets upset. I wouldn't be surprised if SMU beat Baylor, and then maybe if something gave out in the Duke-Carolina game, maybe SMU could sneak into the 8. But those are kind of a few that I see right off the bat.
Maybe SMU will actually get invited to be in the Big 12, so then they could actually really have 12 teams instead of 10.
Play some competition too.
Yeah. When I look, Gonzaga shouldn't be a sleeper as a number 1, but I think everyone's waiting for them to finally get to the Final Four. It's been such a difficult thing for them to do. I think Michigan, this run in the conference tournament, it's not the same conditions, but you think when UConn made the run with Kemba, and you think of some other years where teams made a run through the conference tournament, and I think Michigan having this setback, this unfortunate thing with the airplane, could propel them to making a deep run too. Don't count out UCLA. They might feel a little disrespected being on that number 3 line. I think Louisville's got a tough road to get through the Midwest, but they're always a good team. And then you got your usual suspects, Duke and Kentucky, who aren't sleepers because they're the blue bloods and we expect them to be there, but they may not have the same group or the same respect heading into the tournament that they normally would.
And whenever I pick, my sleepers or who I even want to win the tournament, I feel like your guard play is the most important thing. You look at the past, the past 10 years, I feel like almost every title team had some sort of electrifying guard play. Like you look at both the UConn titles, like you said, Kemba, but Shabazz Napier and
right.
Ryan Boatwright just went bonkers just for the tournament, not
right.
even during the season. So when you look at these sleeper teams, you look at, like we said, a Rhode Island, E.C. Matthews, and you look at a lot of these other teams who have most of their scoring coming from their guards. Is going to be a big deal come tournament time.
It is, and they've always talked about guard play and at least one good front court player, whether that's a forward or a center. So we've gotten through our upsets, we've gotten through our sleepers. We're in Phoenix now, mentally in our minds. Who you got in the Final Four?
My 4 pick in the East, I have the Duke Blue Devils. I'm riding the hot streak out. Kennard is an impressive player, lefty. I always love the lefties because I am lefty. But
that is true. Your lefty shot from the corner is pretty stealth.
Right. That 15-footer, it's automatic for me. But anyways, I have Duke, and then the Midwest, I have another ACC team. I really like Louisville coming out of the Midwest. I don't think Kansas has enough this year. Louisville has a lot of experienced players. Another guy to watch, Donovan Mitchell. He's a sophomore. He's done really well in the ACC for Louisville. We go over to the West. I think something's got to give for Gonzaga this year. I'm putting them in my Final Four, and I'm going to be really upset if they don't make it because Mark Few has been there forever, and they still have not made a Final Four. But anyways, and then we go to the South, and I'm just going to ride the guard play of Kentucky, of De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk, and I'm punching their ticket to Phoenix.
I've made some changes to a few of my picks, even since what I thought with the latest bracketology, and somehow I think Villanova is going to get through, but Duke is definitely a formidable choice for you to make. Kansas, somehow I think they can do it if the teams at the bottom half of that bracket beat each other up. I think they got an easier road at the top half. But again, who's going to come out of the bottom? And I would have thought Louisville, so I like that selection. But I'll give Kansas, a chance to maybe do it. I'm going to say North Carolina out of the South because I think the same thing could happen again as Kansas might happen. Which team, UCLA or Kentucky, wants to emerge from the bottom part of the bracket? That's going to be the linchpin again. So I've got some number ones that it's like, well, they've got to kind of have a few things go their way. And then my team out of the West, because I think the West is so wide open, is going to be a team with the name West in it, who actually is the graduating school of Jerry West, which is West Virginia.
And I thought that was the toughest to pick. Like I just said Arizona earlier in the show, but like I'm really pushing for Gonzaga. But I think 1 through like 6, anybody can make that Final Four. Maryland, like Notre Dame, Florida State. I wouldn't be surprised if I saw any of them in that region coming out.
I wouldn't want to mess with Press Virginia. Okay, now I'm not a huge Bob Huggins fan, never have been. But there's something magical going on there with the Mountaineers this year. And I think you have good guard play, like you talked about, some bruisers down low, which they have. And you press and play some really hard defense, a la some old Kentucky teams and now currently Louisville teams with Rick Pitino. I think that gives them an edge to somehow sneak out of there and pick off Gonzaga. And then, I don't know about Arizona. 30-4 is a nice little record, but they did lose to the Zags. They maybe haven't been as tested as they should be. And West Virginia is a tough, hard-nosed club. So that brings us to who's raising the trophy. And I'm going to give it to the Tar Heels. I'm not a Carolina fan either. I don't really have a college team. I should have put that out there, right? Well, other than Albany, who hopefully is going to get a CBI invite tonight. I'm waiting to see what's going to happen for the Danes.
That's your main event.
The ladies,
not
the ladies,
not the NIT, not the NCAA, the CBI.
Well, the ladies are already in the tournament, and this is their 5th consecutive trip. So, I feel pretty good about what they might be able to do. And I was there last year when they got the win over Florida, and then they played Syracuse tough, but they just didn't have enough. So I feel good about that. But, yeah, I'm waiting where the Danes are going to be. So I'll give it to Carolina. I don't feel comfortable really about that at all, just like I don't feel comfortable about some of the other teams I said. Who are you giving it to in Phoenix?
I don't know. It's tough. Right now, I think if you were to put a gun to my head, be like, listen, you got to pick a winner. I think I would pick Kentucky. Who would they beat? I would probably say Duke. I don't see Gonzaga in the finals, but I'm just hoping that, for Coach Cal's tenure here at Kentucky, the fact that he's had so many star players like John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Anthony Davis. I could just keep naming them off the top of my head. And he only has 1 national championship to his name. I feel like that's got to change sooner or later. I don't think this is one of his strongest teams, but I feel like they would have to have Carolina get knocked off, maybe by Butler or somebody in that upper echelon for them to make it to the finals. But I'm banking on the Wildcats bringing home the dub.
It's not a bad pick. It might be one of their more balanced teams in years, kind of excluding that star per se. So, I think it's wide open. I know people have said that. I know people have talked about parity over the last few years. Again, I know we're going to get all these people out of the woodwork that really think that they're great, college basketball fans. We're basketball fans. We watch a lot of it. And for us, it's going to be hard to pick. So, to all those people out there that are going to be wiping the Buffalo sauce off their chins at Buffalo Wild Wings or TGI Fridays or the local watering hole, check your knowledge at the door. How much do you really know about this game? But they'll act like they do. So we normally would finish with buzzer beaters, Coach, and I want to, but there's a lot of things that we can parlay this buzzer beaters off to when we're talking about what happens this coming weekend. So if it's okay with you, I think we're just going to hold off on that. But what our buzzer beaters is going to be to sort of tease the listeners here is we're going to talk about some of our greatest and most favorite NCAA moments. And they could have been in person or some game you watched on TV revolving around the tournament. So if that's okay with you, I think we'll just pause that. And we're going to be talking about so much college hoops over the next couple weeks that's going to be perfect for that moment.
Yeah, that works with me. It's going to be one of my favorite topics in next week, I can already tell.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot to say. Who knows? There might be a moment, depending upon when we're able to do our next pod, as to what that we've never seen before, that we saw this weekend for the first time. So it's going to be exciting. So this was a long episode, deep in knowledge, deep in basketball, NBA, and NCAA. Glad you could join us, Coach. I think you did the assistant job pretty well.
I was happy to be the Robin to your Batman. Tim.
Well, that's taking it a little bit, too far. But I could tell you had the clipboard, you had the whistle ready, you were checking things off on the schedule. So we're pretty excited to have you in that role when need be. So thanks for being with us. And we will be back with episode 6 of Borderline Ballers sometime next week.